Hey everybody, this is a brief video where I want to make a distinction between a couple terms that we offer in a discussion of the international stage. The terms nationalism, globalism, and globalization. People throw these words around a lot and they use them very carelessly, but I don't want you to be one of those individuals. I want you to have a nuanced understanding of what these different words mean and the implications when you use them. So let's start with nationalism. Some people consider nationalism to be a bad thing, and I don't think that's true or fair. But we have certain words attached to nationalism, you may see where I'm going with this, that make it bad. White nationalism, right, is associated with the KKK, neo-Nazis, and the like. Anytime you have a subgroup and nationalism attached, it's very exclusionary. There are often concepts of superiority and inferiority between groups, xenophobia. Doesn't matter if you're a white or a black or a this or that nationalist. If you want your team to control all the levers of power, that's bad. So we reject that largely. But nationalism can be understood in terms of patriotism, which is just, I love my country and I think my culture's cool and we have good things to offer. And reasonably, cultures all around the world are good in their own unique ways, us included. Are we better than other cultures? Not interested in having that conversation. Not the point. Nationalism, in its neutral form, can simply be love for one's nation. But that is not exactly where we are interested in going with this particular discussion. I just want to acknowledge those concepts. When we talk about nationalism in the context of nationalism, globalism, and globalization, consider nationalism as preference for the autonomy of the nation state, right? Individual nation states get to call the shots within their borders and about how they interact with other nations in the world. The alternative to this is globalism. When you attach ism to the end of the word, that usually denotes some sort of moral claim or ideological stance. It's a political or a philosophical thrust, and so globalism is. And so when we think of nationalism in terms of individual nation-state autonomy, we can think of globalism as, well, nearly the opposite of that. The weakening of state autonomy or state freedom to act as it chooses, and instead to be obligated to the considerations of the broader international community. The UN, the European Union, NATO, these are all international organizations that impact multiple countries and bring multiple countries in line towards some agreement. Now, the European Union is much more binding. NATO is binding. The UN is not binding. But the premise is still there. Through collective action, nation states, whether it be politically, economically, or military, can organize their efforts towards some greater goal. And so globalism argues that we ought to move in that direction. That is a preferable way to organize our systems. As opposed to nationalism, in this context, is preference for individual state autonomy. I will join whatever organizations I choose to join, and I will abide by them at my preference. But I will not join any particular organization or I will not be party to an organization that forces any decisions upon me or my population. Say I'm a state leader, right? I'm not going to put myself in that position. I'm not going to play that game. My nation state comes first. The interests of my people and my nation state come first. And so I'm not joining some international organization that I have to take orders from. Right? That's a very nationalist perspective. This is one of the challenges going on in Europe, for example, but not only Europe, where the individual nation states are starting to feel a little bit of pressure from their local populations because sometimes they're getting laws handed down to them from the European Commission or European Council of government that doesn't necessarily come from this specific country or that specific country. Laws are made for them from outside and being imposed. Not everybody likes that. So, nationalism, preference for state autonomy in this context, Globalism, preference for collective action and more political, economic, and military integration, limiting the actions of any individual state. And then globalization. Now, globalization, different from globalism, can be considered as the de facto intercourse between peoples, cultures, ideas, and economies. It happens naturally. There's no claim that it ought to or ought not to happen. And this has been happening forever, since the Silk Road from Asia to the Middle East and into Europe. And then Rome built roads, and it made travel easier, and so it connected more parts of the world there. And then the Europeans began building seafaring vessels after the Vikings. And so international commerce over the seas increased. That's all globalization. The spread of religion from the Middle East to different parts of the world, whether it be Christianity, Islam, or Judaism. Globalization. Well, you get the idea. Anytime there's war between countries is a form of interaction. It's a belligerent and dangerous one, but it's a form of interaction nonetheless. Globalization. So globalization is not a moral claim about what we ought to be doing. It just happens when we do stuff. Globalism is a claim, and nationalism is similarly a claim, but I do want you to be able to make the distinction between nationalism as love for one's country versus preference for individual state autonomy as opposed to a globalist collective action framework. Sorry this ran so long, but I hope that was useful.